What do you think creates a career with longevity for artists?
It's funny. That's a question I probably would have answered a bit differently 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because by its very nature these days, it seems to be a much more transitory sort of career. You know, you have something that reacts on TikTok and you kind of ride that as far as that'll take you. And then where are you? And for a lot of artists, you're nowhere.
Yeah.
Maybe you made a bit of money on something that went viral, but, you know, having a viral hit doesn't create a career. It just creates a viral hit. So I'm not sure I have great advice on that other than when people take their eye off of what connected with a fan base in the first place, that can be a real problem. So I think the art is first and foremost in all of these things. That's where the commitment has to be. It has to be a commitment to writing. It has to be a commitment to art. It has to be a commitment to improving the art. And I find that the rest kind of follows from that.
Welcome to the Vocal Lab. I'm Sarah Ramsey, and this show aims to pull back the curtain on the entertainment industry, where veterans give up-and-coming artists some of the information they wish they'd had when they were just starting out. Sort of a music industry primer, if you will. Welcome to the Vocal Lab. I am very happy to have Jonathan Simkin back with me today. Jonathan was my first guest on the podcast last year, and he's back with me today to talk some more good music stuff. Jonathan has had a wild ride of a career, starting as a criminal and refugee lawyer. Jonathan accidentally fell into the music business in the early 90s. Not realizing he had a talent for finding talent, Jonathan discovered and secured recording agreements for many artists who went on to huge success, including Nickelback, Len, Steal My Sunshine, and Default. Jonathan has been intimately involved in guiding the career of Nickelback, the biggest selling recording artist of the last 20 years. In 2001, Jonathan and Nickelback singer Chad Kroeger started 604 Records, which has grown into one of the biggest Canadian independent labels and is internationally known for its many hits, including one of the biggest selling digital singles of all time, Call Me Maybe by Carly Rae Jepsen. Other 604 artists include Mariana's Trench, Coleman Hell, Dallas Smith, Dirty Radio, and Theory of a Dead Man. Jonathan also runs Simkin Artist Management, which manages the careers of many of the bands of 604, as well as other artists. In 2014, Simkin built a new headquarters for 604 in the Railtown district of Vancouver, and those headquarters incorporate professional recording studios and a soundstage. In 2017, Simkin started Comedy Here Often, a comedy record label which includes comedians such as Yumi Nagashima and Charlie Demers. More recently, Comedy Here Often launched the 604 Podcast Network, which has had some nice early successes with a number of charting podcasts and is the happy home of our show. In 2021, Simkin started the fourth record label under the 604 brand. Intraset is an ambient label that's already had success in the playlisting world through a series of compilations. And in addition to his work in music, Simkin also guides the visual art careers of some of the top visual graphic artists in the world, including Mad Dog Jones, Fuck Render, and Victor Mosquera. Simkin's newest project is 604 Decades, an imprint that will focus on re-releasing or releasing for the first time music made by great Vancouver bands from bygone decades. The first release will be from 90s Vancouver band Movieland. Thanks for hanging out with me today, Jonathan.
It's weird to hear somebody talking about you. I mean, it's just weird. It makes me feel old and weird.
Well,
I am old and weird.
If the shoe fits.
Yeah. Am I the only guest who's been on twice?
You are you are the second guest who's been on twice.
Who else was on twice?
Michelle Marquardt DeVoe, but
I'm way more interesting than her. I don't know who that is. I'm kidding. I don't know who that is.
You guys speak on very different pieces of the industry.
Gotcha.
So here on the Vocal Lab, we aim to shine a light into the music industry through the lens of what I know now that I wish I'd known then. With that in mind, if you were starting your career all over again, is there anything you would do differently?
Oh boy. Probably not. I always say, and I do believe that part of the reason for 604's successes has been that I fell into it by accident, that I didn't come to it with a bunch of, baggage. I think a lot of people who do the kind of job that I do, whether it's management or record label or even entertainment lawyering, a lot of those people were failed musicians. And I just mean, when I say failed, I just mean in the sense couldn't make a living doing it. And, how many people succeed if they want to be a singer? Like 0.00001%. So for a lot of people, I think it's like, well, I really want to be in music. I really want to work in music. And if I can't have a career as a singer, well, I'm going to start a management company, or I'm going to start a record label, or I'm going to go back to school and become an entertainment lawyer. That wasn't me. I was a poverty lawyer. I was happy being a poverty lawyer. I was doing criminal law and refugee work, and I fell into the music business by accident. And I think that really has helped my career. So in that sense, I don't think I would want to do anything differently, because I think it was that sort of falling into it accidentally, without expectations or any understanding of how standard practice in the business works. I just had a tendency, and I guess I still do, to just kind of do things that to me seem like common sense. And that has worked out really, really well. If I had come from the music industry, I don't think I would have been as successful, because I was questioning everything right from day one. Like, when we did our first distribution deal, 604 with Universal, and this is now 21 years ago, Jesus Christ. When we did that, just as an example, I refused to give up our digital rights. It's very standard for an independent label distributed by a major label to just basically hand over digital rights. But it made no sense to me. And I remember saying to Randy Lennox, who ran Universal at that time, like, look, I'm happy to pay you to do things that I can't do for myself, but I can upload stuff to iTunes. I don't need your help doing that. Why would I pay you? I think at that point it was like 20%. Why would I pay you 20% to do something I can do myself? And, Randy, I think it was like, well, we'll get you more prominent placement, on the iTunes store. And I was like, yeah, well, I'm going to take my chances on that. And boy, has that ever defined our company. I mean, I think we're the only independent label on Universal all those years who, owned our own digital rights. And then when we switched to Sony, there was no way I was going backwards. And when we switched to Warner most recently, same thing. Now, there's a good example of something where, had I known more about it, had I been familiar with the fact that labels just give that up, I might not have thought about it. But to me, it just made no sense. So I thought about it. Just an example. So, I think, funny enough, the way it unfolded really was in a way that made the label more successful, because I didn't know what the fuck I was doing.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about... So again, this is a question that I ask a lot of guests, and I'm not specifically asking you to name names, but you can answer it however you want to answer it. What have been the most important relationships in your career in terms of getting you from where you started to where you are now that have made an impact on the trajectory of your career?
For me, I would probably have to say the relationships I have with the various artists I've worked with. And I say that like as distinguished from, say, record business people.
Right.
Those are important relationships as well. But for me, I was always much more comfortable hanging out with artists, talking music with artists, something always kind of creeped me out about the music business, still does. And about many people in the music business who just kind of give me the willies. I think my ability to communicate with artists has really inspired some loyalty from artists, because I think they know with me, the art comes first. And that's an easy thing to say. It just sounds like a toss away comment, but I mean, it's even in our contracts. I mean, I don't mess around with people's art. And, you know, I think that comes in part from the fact that, you know, for the 5 or 7 years that I was an entertainment lawyer before 604 existed, you know, I had to deal with a lot of jackass A&R people, you know, coming into a studio when a band's recording, and making stupid comments. I'm not a musician. I mean, I can play a little bit of guitar, but I'm not a musician. I don't think it's my place. You know, the musician's job is to make art. My job's to sell art. They're interrelated, but they're not the same job. And if somebody asks my opinion, I'm totally happy to answer it. You know, your brother had me by his studio to listen to the album and ask my opinion, and we had a great conversation about it. I can talk music. I know how to, but I also don't interfere with people's art. And once we sign a band, they've already passed the audition. They don't have to kind of perpetually be auditioning for me or for us. So yeah, I have to say, looking back on it all, you know, it's my bond with, like, you know, with Chad Kruger and with Ryan Peake and with Josh Ramsey and with, you know, with the various artists that we've worked so closely with. That has really been a large part of where my power sort of has come from.
Yeah. And working with, and I mean, seeing the industry from a lot of different angles, what do you think creates a career with longevity for artists?
It's funny. That's a question I probably would have answered a bit differently 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because by its very nature these days, it seems to be a much more transitory sort of career. You know, you have something that reacts on TikTok, and you kind of ride that as far as that'll take you. And then where are you? And for a lot of artists, you're nowhere.
Yeah.
Maybe you made a bit of money on something that went viral, but, you know, having a viral hit doesn't create a career. It just creates a viral hit. So I'm not sure I have great advice on that, other than when people take their eye off of what connected with a fan base in the first place, that can be a real problem. So I think the art is first and foremost in all of these things. That's where the commitment has to be. It has to be a commitment to writing. It has to be a commitment to art. It has to be a commitment to improving the art. And I find that the rest kind of follows from that.
I think it's an interesting thing to look at, though, because I hear what you're saying about, you know, having to keep your eye on what connects with your audience in the first place. And you don't want to put the same thing out over and over and over again.
There's that as well. I mean, like most things in life, or most things in a career, you have to constantly be looking for ways to grow.
Yeah.
And to improve and to, you know, do things better. Now, having said that, I think there are some artists who do kind of make the same record over and over again. And if they have a big enough fan base who are looking for that, that can work as well. You know, again, I'm not one to really comment too much about an artist's art, other than, you know, I will give an honest opinion when asked. And certainly sometimes I've had bands deliver records to us that I felt in my heart I was going to have a hard time selling.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll express that sometimes, but never with a sort of like, well, you better go back in and I need a single. I mean, that crap I just don't do. But especially if I'm asked the question, I'll be honest about it and say, look, I think we're going to have some trouble. I don't think this is something that's going to work at radio. I'm not sure it's something that's going to, work at Spotify. This could be a challenge selling this. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. The business has become so, what's the word? Niche. There aren't a lot of artists anymore that have these massive audiences. I mean, yes, there's still the Taylor Swifts and the Billie Eilishes and so forth in the world. But, a more typical experience might be, say, like something like Carly Rae Jepsen, where, she has this massive global hit. It's like, I think it's once again the biggest selling digital single in history. I mean, that thing never slows down.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a single day, literally, where I don't have at least one email about that song. Now, it might be something smallish, like a compilation record in South Africa, or it might be something weird, like a soap commercial in Poland, or it might be something massive, like I don't think I can talk about this way, but we just got it licensed for a film by a really, really well-known director who I'm a big fan of. Mm-hmm. So, it's just constant. But what's interesting is that, she hasn't really had a hit since then. Mm-hmm. I mean, Good Time did okay, that one with Owl City. In Canada, we were able to get another song charting on Emotion. I'm having a brain fart. I think it was Your Type. Anyways, we had another single that charted in Canada. But, she hasn't really had a radio single since. Mm-hmm. And I bring this up really more to the point that she has successfully created a real niche sort of audience for herself. Mm-hmm. It's largely LGBTQ, which is a great audience for a bunch of reasons. Loyal, they buy tickets, they buy records, they're loud online. But even somebody who's had, like, arguably the biggest hit in the last 25 years, her career's kind of turned into this kind of niche-y career. Yeah. Not the worst place to be. I mean, she can tour the world. She could probably play, depending on the country, between 1 and 7,000 people. Yeah. And make a living. Yeah. Which in my book is a huge victory. So it's just funny how the business has changed. Like, as a label, we're very lucky because we have all this great catalog that kind of sustains us. Carly, Theory of a Dead Man, Mariana's Trench, Dallas Smith, and then, a bunch of hits, Coleman Hell, Two Heads, and Danny and Lizzie Dancing in the Sky. And, we have these songs that, kind of keep the lights on in the building and enables us to, keep signing bands. Mm-hmm. But the whole idea of what is a success is much different now than it was, when I first started the company. I mean, when I first started the company, you were always dreaming of having the massive hit, the Call Me Maybe, the How You Remind Me, and I still dream of that. And I still love that when it happens. But I think now you're just like, man, if I could just turn a profit on this record, it doesn't even have to be a huge profit. Mm-hmm. That just kind of keeps the whole thing rolling along. And if you get lucky and lightning strikes and you have another Call Me Maybe, then you're thankful for it. Mm-hmm. But I've said around the office lately, and I say it kind of half jokingly, if we really wanted to make more money, we'd stop signing bands and just focus on the catalog. Because in the day and age of streaming, catalog even means something completely different. And I'll give you an example. I'm just rambling. I hope that's okay. This is Simkin on like 3.5 hours sleep, just FYI.
And 87 coffees.
And 87 coffees, yeah. Theory of a Dead Man hasn't been on the label for a couple of records. They ran the course with they delivered all the albums they were obligated to. And, they decided they wanted to go for the big money deal at that point. Yeah. And hey, you know what? I was a little disappointed, but God bless them. I can't begrudge that. They have kids and shit. Like,
Yeah.
I don't mind them going for the big money. So I think it's been 2 albums now that haven't been with us. So they go and they announce a world tour. And when they do, I'm telling you, me and my CFO are high-fiving, because this is one of the biggest differences about streaming. When I was a kid, and a band would go on tour, you would go out and buy the band that they were touring in support of. So as much as I hate to admit it, I saw Fleetwood Mac on the Rumors tour. I don't hate to admit it, but it tells you how old I am. But
I'm envious.
Well, I was very young. In fairness to myself, I was, I think maybe even grade 7 or I was just a big fan of grade 8.
Yeah.
And I already owned that first record, the self-titled one with Rhiannon on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was already a big fan. Now, when they announced they were touring in support of Rumors, I got my parents to buy me Rumors.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because that was the album they were supporting. I didn't go back and repurchase the album I already owned. I already owned it. It was on vinyl. I wasn't going to go back and rebuy it. But that's not how it works now. Yeah. When Theory of a Dead Man goes on tour, the entire catalog streams. People aren't going back and just sort of like, it's like the whole thing. So they go on a world tour. Holy shit. Like the uptake on the streaming is insane. And that's the same with all these artists. They go on tour and the streaming goes through the roof. So it's really recast what I'm doing here as a label. I'm so much now more focused on catalog and both repurposing catalog, but also re-highlighting catalog.
Yeah.
We're doing a lot of stuff like that right now, where we're going a bit backwards in time. Like we just put out a Thornley. We just put out the 20-year anniversary digital edition of the Thornley record. We added some new tracks. We put out a vinyl, but we're doing some other cool things too. Like, for example, the videos that are up online from that album look like shit. And I think that's the same with a lot of videos from 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's because online the quality degrades or if it's just that the technology was different. So we're using AI to really make much more, not perfect, that's the wrong word, but, to have them look great again, to restore. It's almost like a remastering job of the video. I love stuff like that. Like that's the thing about having 21 years of catalog. All of a sudden you've got this whole treasure chest of like, oh my God, we never put this thing out, or, oh my God, here's this weird video that we never. Now suddenly we're going backwards. We're transferring everything. And we're going to start to put some older stuff out. Yeah. Your Brothers Band's another great example of that, where, I came up with this thought on the new album. Like, we have all these fans who've been so loyal. Like, we're so lucky. We haven't put out a record in 5 years. And here, I'm looking at Spotify. It's like, Jesus, we still have 900,000 monthly listeners. It's kind of a miracle in this day and age that you don't put out any music for 5 years. And I was like, we got to use these fans to sort of, we have this great built-in promo team, which is our own fans. Mm-hmm. So we spent a good 6 weeks doing nothing but putting out old stuff. Yeah. I don't know if you saw any of that stuff,
I did.
but the band, and I'm not everybody in the band, but a couple of guys in the band I think thought I was nuts with, like, just didn't understand. And I was trying to explain, like, look, we want to use our own fan base as the big cheerleaders in the initial phase of this record. Let's get them all juiced up. Let's get them all crazy. That's only going to help. It's going to spill over to get some other fans. And if nothing else, it ensures that when we finally do put out something new, they're already so jazzed
Primed.
Up. Right.
Yeah.
So anyways, I don't even remember your question. I'm just rambling here. Hopefully there's some tidbits in there that are useful.
Absolutely. When the Mariana's Trench socials were doing all of that, older stuff, I went, oh my God, I have a box that has been through, I think, 3 or 4 moves with me that has posters and stickers from the Fix Me record. And I brought it in and gave it to the team here.
Love it.
Because I love that. I didn't need them in my attic anymore. I kept one of each, but what am I going to do with 40 posters?
Well, what we did was over the Easter break, we closed. Was Easter Friday? I can't remember what the holiday was Friday. Easter Friday. Well, we closed on Thursday, and the whole staff came in just to go through boxes and boxes and boxes of tapes, and it was amazing what we found.
Yeah.
Remixes I had forgot existed that we had never put out. Videos that we can now use to enhance and master.
Yeah.
Songs that, like, there was a band on our label called the Armchair Cynics, and I love that band.
I remember that. The name of that band.
Yeah, they were great. And you know what? It just didn't work out. Why? Who knows? I mean, why does some stuff not work out? I don't know.
Yeah.
Some stuff doesn't work out. And I found an entire album, and we're putting it out with the band's blessing. I'm so happy that kind of stuff makes me. And if we hadn't taken a moment to go back through the boxes and drives, and we just found so much great stuff. So I'm really on maybe that's a function of getting old, but like I'm on a real sort of tear with that stuff. And that also explains the New Decades label, which, it's going backwards in time and sort of refocusing on things. I don't know. I guess you have a little bit of success and you sort of go, man, that thing didn't work out in 1998. Well, maybe it's unrealistic to think it's going to be huge now, but at least I can give it some attention.
Yeah.
At least I can shine a spotlight on it and say, hey, here's a band I think deserved a lot more than they got. So, hey, let me do my part and at least get it out into the world and shine a spotlight on it.
I think that's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, I think Ramsey Fiction might be next.
I can't wait to hear some of that stuff. That's I don't even know. Josh and I listen to old Ramsey Fiction stuff. Even he and I can't tell who's singing what.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I've been making this joke online, and I think it makes the fans a little, like, a lot of people scratch their head, but because there's that song that they used to play called PMS.
Oh yeah. And
anytime there's anything online, or like Marianne's are like, hey, what's your favorite Mariana song? I'm always right there on social media. PMS.
There's a song. It's actually my ringtone on my phone when Josh phones me.
Yeah.
Shiny like dirt. 'Cause I'm shiny like dirt, beautiful like hurt, lonely like me, just like the scar on my knee.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Was that Ramsey Fiction?
Yes, it was. And I was singing, but Josh sings it with a fair bit of grit in his voice. And I was singing a harmony part on that tune that was lower than him, but I was trying to sing it with all this grit, and it was ridiculous. The vocal on it is ridiculous. And at one point he was mixing it, and he phoned me and he just soloed my track, and it's me going, I'm shiny like dirt.
That's funny. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm assuming people who listen to this broadcast know. I mean, your brother's Josh from Marianas Trench, for those who don't know. So we sometimes lapse into conversations about stuff that probably assuming everybody knows what we're talking about. And Ramsey Fiction was the band before it was Marianas Trench.
Yeah.
It was sort of Marianas Trench Mach 1. And so the first time I saw them was at the Purple Onion. And Ian, who's in the band, was in that band. Ian Castleman, and obviously Josh. You were in the band. Trevor was in the band. Your ex.
Trev played bass, and Steve Marshall played guitar. Even though Trev's a guitar player and Steve's a bass player.
So what's his name? Morgan wasn't in the band at that?
No, when Trev and I left the band, because Trev is my ex-husband, and we got pregnant with twins, and we already had a little one. And so the thought of like going on the road with 94 children was not on. So we left the band, and Matt and Morgan joined the band. They sort of replaced us.
But Matt was originally keyboards.
Yes,
and then when Steve left, and then when Steve left, he became the guitar player, Matt.
Yes.
Yeah, because I remember doing those showcases with them in LA when Steve and Morgan were still in the band.
Yeah.
And Matt was on keys.
Yes.
Which is interesting. You said
I think Matt played kind of both, like keys and guitar.
Yep.
But he was really mostly keys at first.
At the beginning, absolutely.
I think he kind of learned to play guitar in Mariana's Trench.
That might be true. That rings a bell as well.
Yeah.
But it's just funny because, like, I remember the first time I saw the band, it was that configuration, and your dad was in the audience.
Yeah.
And your dad at that point was still, I think, doing the Chevron guy commercials. Yeah. And I remember, like, there was, like, I think more people in the audience were excited that the Chevron guy was there than they were about the band. I think he signed a couple autographs that night.
Yeah, that tracks.
Yes, it's funny.
Let's talk all things royalties. I'm going to ask you to put on your professor's hat for a bit here. You taught for a stretch in the Arts and Entertainment Management program up at CapU, and this is one of the areas that you taught about, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I lecture at UBC Law School, and that topic tends to come up there a lot too.
Okay, good. I didn't actually know that part.
I lecture there a couple times a year.
Okay. I think it's an area that emerging artists don't always understand very well because it's a complicated area. And especially artists who are doing it like very DIY independent with no management or label handholding. Mm-hmm. There's a lot to know. So go. Put on your professor pants.
Well, okay. So most royalty things in the music business start from the fact that when you record a song, there's essentially two related but distinct copyrights involved in that. There's a copyright in the master recording, and there's a copyright in the song. And sometimes that's owned by the same person or people, and sometimes it isn't. So if I decided to sign myself to a record deal, and the first thing I put out was Simkin Sings McCartney, 604 would own the master recordings of those songs. But just because I recorded those songs written by Paul McCartney doesn't mean I own those songs written by Paul McCartney. In fact, I don't. Paul McCartney owns those songs. And all the revenues and royalties in the music business flow from those two copyrights. Mm-hmm. And they sort of mirror one another. When I used to teach, I used to have this diagram where I'd sort of draw a disc like a CD or a vinyl and sort of show the money that comes out on the master side and the money that comes out on the song side. So that's an important distinction to keep clear. Master copyright, song copyright. So let's go through that. Record royalties is a sort of generic way of referring to the royalties that get generated by the song being either made, the master recording being made into either a physical record or a digital record. So let's say I'm independent and I go through one of those companies, CD Baby or DistroKid or one of those companies to get my music up on Spotify. The money that I get back from Spotify is a record royalty, essentially. Sounds funny calling it that because you don't really think of Spotify as a record, but it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's money that's paid from the reproduction of that master recording. Now, on the other side of the equation, the song side, that is mirrored by the mechanical royalty, which is just a fancy pants way of referring to the royalty that's payable from the reproduction of a song or from the streaming of a song. On Spotify, it's not as much as is payable on the master, but nonetheless, every time somebody streams a song, there is some money that goes into the master account. There is some money that goes into the song account. Now, let's say you get lucky and you get your song played on the radio. Same thing. There's two different kinds of royalties that flow from that. On the master side, you've got what's called neighboring rights. Neighboring rights are the public performance royalty that's paid to the master owner and the performer on the master. So You get your song played on CBC. There is a royalty on the master side, the neighboring right royalty, that would be administered in Canada. Well, it depends. There's a few different options, but some people go through ACTRA, some people go through Resound. And that is a royalty that comes from by virtue of the fact that the song got played in the radio. That is mirrored by the public performing royalty on the song side. That's the one that's administered in Canada by SOCAN. So song gets played on the radio, 2 separate royalties flow from that, from the public performance of it. The SOCAN public performance compositional royalty, the ACTRA or Resound neighboring right public performance royalty. But again, interesting to note that, they mirror each other. Mm-hmm. It's just one performance on CBC, yet 2 different royalty streams sort of flow out of that. And if it was Simkin Sings McCartney, the SOCAN part would be going to Paul McCartney, and the neighboring rights part would be going to 604 and Simkin. Master use licenses. There's another one, which again, where the song and the master kind of mirror one another. So, Call Me Maybe gets licensed for use in a movie. Unlike the other royalties I was just talking about, that is almost always equal. So if somebody like a music supervisor or somebody who works at a film company wants to license Call Me Maybe, they'll make an offer and they'll say it's all in. All that really means is that's meant to cover both the master side and the composition side. And that's always 50-50. So if somebody makes an all-in offer for a license and it's $10,000, it's understood that $5,000 of that is attributable to the master and $5,000 of that is attributable to the song. Sound exchange. Although sound exchange actually ends up being a funny one because it's very specific and really related to the master. And there isn't exactly the mirror image of that one on the song side. But sound exchange essentially does 2 things. It covers the public performance royalties that flow from Sirius XM radio. And for some people, most notably comedians, that can be their primary source of revenue. It's big. It can be big if you get a lot of airplay. Mm-hmm. Then it also covers non-interactive internet royalties, and that's complicated, so I'll break that down. Non-interactive means the listener does not control what is being played. So look at something like Spotify. Well, that's completely in the control of the listener. I feel like listening to this song. But that's to be distinguished from, say, internet radio, where it's not in the control of the listener. If you listen to an internet, and those are becoming more popular. If you listen to an internet radio station, it's like listening to a terrestrial radio station in the sense that what you're listening to is not controlled by you. Mm-hmm. It's controlled by the other party. Like locally in Vancouver, the Peak FM went to that model. Mm-hmm. They're now an online only radio station, which means that's an example where Sound Exchange would collect that money and pay it to the label owner and the master, and the performer. So I think those are the main. I'm sure there's a lot of questions to come out of that, but I think those are unless I'm missing something, which I could be. I don't think I am, but I guess I could also say CDs and vinyl. That works essentially the way I described it for Spotify. If I'm selling a CD and as the label and I get a bunch of money, then I have to look at my contract with the artist. 50% of what I made goes back to the artist. On the song side, that's not determined by me. The publishing, as whatever they call it, the Canadian publishers, the publishers of Canada, and then the recording industry of Canada, the Canadian Recording Industry Association. I think every couple of years they meet and then they come up with the current mechanical royalty rate. I don't even know what it is. I think it's around 8 cents a song. So if I sell a record, as wearing the hat as the record label, I owe the recording artist a record royalty for the sale of that record, and I owe the publisher of the song the mechanical royalty as a legal obligation of putting out the record. But again, they sort of mirror each other.
Mm-hmm.
They're not exactly the same amount of money, but they mirror each other in the sense that it's that one action of pressing a record and selling it that leads to the two royalties.
Right. Where do the uses of music on social media fall?
So it depends on which social media. YouTube, if you use that as an example, they this is where I will admit the one part, it's not that I'm confused about it, but because I come to this so much from the experience of owning a record label, I'm not 100% sure how some of this translates if you were an independent artist. But I know that for us, 604 is an independent record label. We have an agreement with YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
We are compensated for our master use rights. If it's a video, we are compensated for the fact that we own the video. And if it's something where we represent the band as management, there's also a publishing royalty that gets paid by YouTube. It gets trickier on things like TikTok and Facebook.
Are the percentages, the splits for all those different kinds of royalties, are those standardized, or are those things that get worked out in negotiations and contracts?
Some are and some aren't. The rates that say SOCAN pays out, God only knows how that's been a mystery to me for 30 years, how those rates are determined. I think there's tariffs. I think that's something that comes down to CRTC and the copyright board, and the mechanical royalty rate that's in effect is not something that is, it's negotiated between the music publishers and the record labels, but once it's established, it just kind of is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, in a record deal, a record company can negotiate with an artist that they're going to pay a lesser rate.
Mm-hmm.
That's less common. When I first started in the business, that was very common, that artists would get a crappy mechanical royalty rate because there would be this sort of standard set out between the music publishers and the record labels, but it wasn't like minimum wage law. It wasn't like you had to get that. If somebody was stupid enough to sign a contract that said, we're going to only pay you 10% of that rate, well, that's that. It's in the contract. You're allowed to contract out of it. But then things like sound exchange, there's tariffs that are established by the government. It's not something you can negotiate. So when you're dealing with a record company, everything's negotiable. 604, for example, is what's called a net receipts company. Our deals with our artists are pure profit splits. If the record profits, then we split the profit with the band. But that's very different than, say, Universal Music, who pays a retail royalty. We will pay you 14% of the published price to dealers for every record that sells. Mm-hmm. So when it's a third party royalty, Sound Exchange, SOCAN, ACTRA, you're not really negotiating. Mm-hmm. You're just getting what they pay. If it's something between you and a record company or another private company, then it's negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. Do you want to explain, again, knowing that we're sort of talking to emerging artists who just may not have the knowledge of this stuff yet, can you explain the difference between the performer and the writer, and how their different royalties kind of come to pass?
Yeah, probably the easiest way to illustrate that is to contrast, say, SOCAN with Sound Exchange. So again, SOCAN is a song royalty. Sound Exchange is a master royalty. But what's interesting is that SOCAN breaks down the royalties into publisher and writer royalties. Mm. So if you've signed an agreement with a publisher, the publisher gets the publisher share of those royalties. If you haven't signed a publishing agreement, you are your own publisher, so you get that as well as the writer's share. And those are not alienable. In other words, that writer share has to go to the writer. Mm-hmm. It can't go anywhere else. the publisher share has to go to the publisher. It can't go to anyone else. Now, that is very much mirrored in Sound Exchange. Sound Exchange also divides the royalties up. But because we're not talking about songs, we're talking about masters, it wouldn't make sense to divide it up as songwriter and publisher. So the way it gets divided up on Sound Exchange is the performer. That's kind of the equivalent of the writer in the SOCAN model, or the owner of the record, which is the equivalent of the publisher. You know, publisher is just a fancy way of saying owner of copyright. That's what I mean, that if you don't have a third-party publishing agreement, you're your own publisher. It just means who owns the copyright. So yeah, if you compare those two types of royalties, you know, the performer aspect mirrors the writer aspect, and the publisher aspect mirrors the record label aspect.
I mean, this is jumping off a little outside of royalties specifically, but you talked about placements. So we're talking about sync.
Yep.
When you were first getting into it, how does one pursue sync placements? I mean, that is a whole stream of revenue that is definitely out there and quite a viable thing. And some people actually sort of tailor their careers to pursue that over like a commercial audience.
Yeah, over like a radio hit.
Yeah, exactly. What's the pathway there?
Boy, I wish I had a great answer for that because, you know, it's one area, having run this label for over 20 years, it's one area where I'm always striving for us to do better. And we do fine. But boy, I wish there was like one answer that I felt great about, and there really isn't. So I think this stuff happens a few different ways. If you're lucky and have a hit like Call Me Maybe, it just comes to you. Yeah. It just does. I wasn't kidding when I said earlier that barely a single day goes by without some kind of a use on that. But that's the rarity. That's the exception. That's the lightning strike. You know, for most people, it's more of a grind, and you more have to be out there kind of pushing it. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a few ways this happens. First off, there are companies who are in the business of pitching, you know, sync licenses. If you have a publisher, then that in theory should be part of their job. I think some are good at it and some aren't. But in theory, certainly, you know, if I'm signed to a publishing deal with, you know, just pick somebody randomly, Cobalt, I'm going to be pressuring Cobalt to get me some sync licenses. Like, hey, I want to make sure I'm part of all these pitches that you're doing. So that's, if you have a publisher, that's, you know, I'm not the biggest fan of publishing deals, but when people ask me like the pros and cons, that's definitely one of the pros. Like if you're with a company who's good at that, then that can be pretty amazing. So that's one way. Then there are actually not publishers, but third-party companies who are like music licensing agencies. And those are companies who do nothing else but that. If you sign with them, they have the exclusive right for a period of time, usually at least a year, to represent you for those sorts of things. So, you know, there's a company in the States, I'm not going to name them because it doesn't really matter, but there's a company in the States that over the years we've used with greater and lesser degrees of success at times. And that's all they do. They go out and pitch the songs. You know, one of the people I know there came to me last Christmas or maybe last November and said, hey, I know we don't rep this particular artist's music, but we thought it might be good for an Olive Garden commercial in the States, and we pitched it and they want to use it. And it was big money. You know, so those kinds of companies can be great. The problem is, I find that we've had trouble sustaining success with those companies. So like, you know, you'll sign up with them and they get you some massive thing and then that's it. Nothing else ever comes out of that deal. But there are a lot of those companies. Like there are a lot of companies out there who do nothing but pitch music for commercials and so forth. We even have somebody internally in our company who does that. So boy, there are a lot of different ways of doing it. The most sure way, and this sounds a stupid thing to say, but is to have a hit. You have a hit, people will end up coming to you. But that's rare and that's hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have 2 or 3 songs as a label that over the years have done really, really well in that world. And I don't know why. I don't know. Like I said, we've experimented so many different ways over the years. You know, once we actually handed over the whole ball of wax to one of these music licensing companies. And honestly, we were disappointed. So when that deal expired, we didn't renew it. Sometimes we have specific artists who are with specific companies. Again, different degrees of success. Sometimes that has worked amazing and sometimes it hasn't. Right now, we have a deal with a company in the States to do nothing but pitch our Christmas music because 604 does a ton of Christmas music and does well with it. But you know, I thought, hey, why don't we have a company pitching, you know, our Christmas music? Like, so now we have hired a company to do, and it's funny because where are we? May, you know, I think the pitching for Christmas starts soon. Like I think it starts kind of June, July.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see what that gets us this year. I mean, Christmas movies, Christmas ads, Christmas, you name it. I mean, there's so much Christmas stuff out there that I'm really hoping that my sort of dedication to holiday music over the 21 years this label has existed is maybe going to pay some extra dividends. It already does great on radio and does great on Spotify. But boy, I would love to get some sync licenses for it.
Yeah, no kidding. Thanks for joining us today. That was actually just part 1 of our interview. And I would love it if you come on back Thursday to catch part 2. Can't wait to see you then.